Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story, Holes in the Heart. Donnie lived alone now. Through the years of hardship, he now understood he lived alone, except for one little thing the day before her, his wife's birthday. He decided to get her the small Dalmatian pup the same day. She told him of her nightmare of the creature crouching in the corner of their bedroom, looking at her through the black holes that had replaced its eyes. Its hair was tangled and messy, and was drawn back. It bore no mouth or nose, just the soulless black eyes. Its body was mangled, and instead of hands, it had a crescent-shaped claw. It looked at her. She told him it looked so real, but of course nothing of that sort of thing existed. Then she died, no signs of death, just lying there next to him. Cold, the coldness that meant she had been dead for a while. Danny lived outside of Oklahoma, in the quiet country. His house was surrounded with forests and wildlife. The old road that no one usually took was a short walk outside. The cracks in the pavement finished the painting that, through the strokes of the brush, he could see a dark, lonely place in the middle of nowhere. Danny loved the pup. Though he took care of it, he fed it, bathed it, and played with it. They were best 3 years he'd had in ages since she died. He'd even named the pup after his wife, Raina. And Raina always threw hissy fits. She'd roll around, groaning and moaning playfully, and Danny would turn away from his TV to watch her. Grinning at her silly behavior, he'd go lay down, mimicking her howls, and would scratch her where she enjoyed. Right next to her front right leg, Raina was the last good thing of Danny's life in a while. She was the bright spot, filling the holes in his heart, holes that had been stripped from their patches. And then, a night came. He thought it was a dream, but he couldn't be sure. He was something that extremely resembled the thing that his wife had seen. The black, empty holes looking into him. The next day when he awoke from his slumber, slightly paranoid of what was a dream. It was a dream. No way could something like that truly exist. I'm gonna grab us lunch. Want anything? Danny asked Rain as she just looked at him with her brown eyes. Salami it is, he said. He walked into his kitchen. Danny's kitchen had a table right in the middle with a little pathway around it. The sink was in front of a window that showcased his backyard, with Raina's toys scattered around everywhere. It normally would have been a beautiful sight to his eyes, but not today, for as he walked in there stood the creature behind the counter. It stared at him, as if expecting him. The two just stood there, looking at each other for a few moments. Then it crouched down, praying mantis style, and almost like a cartoon character trying to tiptoe quietly, scurried behind the counter toward him. Danny thought he was dead as it sprang up, but then he heard a growl, and Raina slammed into it. Danny fell back, watching Raina and the creature fight. Raina was on top of it, her jaws snapping wildly at its neck. Raina was clearly winning, but not for much longer. He went and ran for his room. Looking for his saw, he searched, and finally found it, and under his bed. He raced back over to the kitchen, and his breath was lost for a moment as he saw the horrible scene. It had stuck its claws into her leg, and it was studying her, twitching its head in every other direction. He revved up the saw, and at the sense of sound it snapped its head in his direction almost instantly. It set its head to his side, staring at him. Then it sprang toward him, its claws ready to slash, and he met its charge. He stuck the saw blade into its abdomen and jostled the saw so it was pointing upward. He began to saw, with the blue liquid spurting on the walls and all over him. He sawed through its stomach and through its neck, and split its head into two. It collapsed to its knees, the bluish blood spilling everywhere, and with a disturbing shudder, fell to the ground. Danny raced over to Raynette. Dee also had punctured her abdomen. He thought of anything that he could treat her with, but there was nothing except for him to clean the wounds. He grabbed a clean rag, wet it under the sink, and cleaned the wounds as best he could. She whined softly in pain, but he long realized it was a lost cause. He thought of things she'd liked. His rain as she always loved that old song. He began to hum it softly, his voice cracked with his devastation and sobbing. I'm sitting on top of the world. I'm rolling along, just rolling along. He sang the song, Ryan and looking up at him as he looked down at her. He sang, and at the very end of the last chorus, her eyes closed for the last time. Danny lived alone now through the hardship. He finally realized he was alone. The second story, Explorers. Do you know what loneliness is? To explore One took off its helmet, wiping its brow well. What do you think? A sigh escaped its mouth. What do you mean? The other muttered. Possibly the greatest discovery in history. How else should I react? Did you see some of those objects? A silent pause. Yeah. The two explorers said nothing, discarding their suits and placing them in a sterilizing bin. Underneath were their uniforms. Walking to another area of the ship, one of them reached into a compartment and grabbed the day's half-rations. Care to eat? What's the point? The other remarked forlornly. You and I, and everyone we know dreamed of the day when we could find life on other planets. Remember, it's still possible, you know. Possible. Shit, scoffed the second explorer, if we do. They all probably went the way of this one. Must have been uninhabitable for thousands, maybe millions, of years since we got here. So you do believe in it? Then, the first explorer's voice wavered, picking up a tone of hope. Believe in what? Life. Assuming that life existed here, and that it was intelligent, then why is everything in ruins? Another break in conversation. It was true, certainly, that many objects suggesting life existed here, tools, symbols reminiscent of language, even cleverly forged metals littered the landscape. It doesn't explain what happened here, though. The first explorer continued. My detector is tracing an unnatural amount of decaying isotopes in the atmosphere. This planet's sun, or any external event for that matter, couldn't have caused this. Nodding, the second explorer added, this place seems to have been destroyed, but not from the outside. Look at the deserts out there. Those aren't the kind you can find back home. The sunlight appears incapable of penetrating the thick outer layers of atmosphere. They mused together, but I think it did. At some point, they trailed off. The second explorer frowned. I don't understand how you can just sit there and act like nothing's the matter. This is the first, and maybe only time that we'll ever come as close to extraterrestrial life. What do you want me to do? What do you want? The other replied hotly, I want a reason. The second explorer gesticulated madly, pacing back and forth in that area of the ship. I'll wager that this civilization was indeed intelligent. Very intelligent. All the combinations should have worked out for them. Optimal distance from their sun to permit heat and light energy. Traces of water deposits. What are now canyons and deserts. Presence of gases that could have been used for metabolism. And tools, yes, tools. Yet for some reason, they are gone now. Yes, that's clearly evident. The first explorer interjected. Do you know what loneliness is? It's not a planned space exploration. Spending time away from home loneliness is knowing that you're the only life remaining in the universe, and that everything else had been whisked away while you weren't paying attention. In this vast expanse of space, I thought we would serve as beacons, seeking out stranded life on some uncharted galaxy shores. But I'm starting to believe something different. Perhaps we are the ones stranded. Perhaps in our effort to connect with others, we are trying to outrun a futile pursuit from loneliness. Another pause. Longer this time. Neither one made a sound, until silence stifled the room. Don't give up, there must be some extant life out here. We just have to look harder, said the first explorer, trying to sound comforting. I guess you're right, sighed the other explorer. Well, I'm going to open communications back to home and report on these findings. That's a good idea. What do you want to do? Return home or continue searching? Searching where? I don't know, out there, anywhere. And so, the two explorers surfaces. Upon further consideration, they decided to return promptly back to their home planet, Earth. The third story, the happy people. Honey, I'm home, a smiling man declared as he entered a clean home to a smiling wife and children, who rushed over and hugged him before the children entered the living room and the wife moved into the kitchen. The sound of cheering echoed across the entire area, like an audience from an old television show. Before long the children returned carrying an old smoking pipe and a pair of slippers, which they gave to their father, receiving a pat on the head as he motioned them off towards the old television set, and they ran excitedly over. Taking a seat in his chair, the man lit his pipe and turned on the television. The black and white world in which the family existed suddenly turned into vivid color as the television showed images of shootings and other atrocities from across the modern world. The children clapped excitedly as the father nodded, taking his paper as he began to read, letting his children watch the grisly images as if they were Saturday morning cartoons. After a few moments, the wife came into the room carrying a plate full of apple, while she looked over to the television and smiled at her husband. Oh honey, you'll spoil them, she said. Nonsense. I pay good money for that television, may as well make use of it. Besides, it keeps them happy. The man replies, putting away his paper as he took the plate. I know how's work. The woman replied as she took a seat on a nearby sofa. Can't complain as long as they pay me, can I? We caught a screamer today, the man said, taking a fork and digging into the apple pie. Oh, you haven't had a screamer in a long time, I suppose you got extra? The woman inquired. No deal, I'm afraid, sure. It was a screamer, but it was no breeder. You know how it works, no blood, no pay, the man said, taking a bite of the apple pie. I'm sorry, honey, the woman said. Don't worry about it, we have plenty of others. Bound to be a couple of real bleeders like last year, the man said. Oh yes, that was quite lovely, you even brought one home. The children were ever so happy. The woman smiled. That reminds me, honey, have you fed the lurker yet? The man said. The woman's eyes grew wide and she gasped slightly, getting to her feet as she dashed out the room. Oh, I completely forgot. Poor dear will be starving. I told you to take care of it. You know lurkers don't last long without food. The man shouted, growing angry, and laughter surfacing from the unseen audience. I'm sorry, the woman called out, rushing into the kitchen and taking a slab of meat before she ran to the hallway. I'll show you sorry, you useless piece of crap, the man yelled, getting to his feet and tossing the plate across the room, shattering it against the wall and storming into the hallway. The canned laughter once again, erupting from the invisible audience. The children completely ignored this scene as they giggled to one another, watching the carnage on the television screen. I'm sorry, the woman said, opening the door to the basement and tossing the slab of meat down a set of stairs. As she did so, the man came up behind her and shoved her down the stairs. The canned laughter now grew hysterical. If that lurker is dead, I'm going to break your damn spine, he growled, racing down the stairs after her. However, by the time the man reached the bottom of the stairs, a thin figure had already grabbed the slab of meat and began devouring it, resembling a human male, with long hair and chains wrapped around his arms, and legs only a pair of briefs keeping him modest as he crouched down like an animal, evoking an AWW sound from the audience. The man smiled as he stood up, letting the woman get to her feet. As he nodded a little, well, look at that, honey, the lurker is doing just fine, he declared. Why, yes, he is, isn't he? The woman replied. I'm sorry I yelled at you, honey. Tell you what, how about you make me a nice slice of apple pie? We can watch some more shows before we put the children to bed, the man said, wrapping an arm around the woman as she nodded slightly. Of course, honey, I'll be more careful next time, I promise, the woman said as the couple went back up the stairs to the sound of riotous applause.